The cold wind whistled through the bustling streets of Paris as Mariam tightened her coat around her. It was nearly midnight, and she was finishing her long shift at one of the most prestigious restaurants near the Place Vendôme, a place where only the richest dined and where appearances mattered more than kindness. Mariam had always believed in doing the right thing, even when no one was watching. She was the type of person who would help an old man cross the street, who would pay for a stranger's coffee without needing thanks. But tonight, her quiet kindness would cost her everything. The door to the restaurant swung open and a man walked in. He wore a simple beige jacket, dark pants, and worn shoes. His posture was relaxed, his gaze steady, yet there was something about him, a quiet power beneath the modest clothing. To the other waiters, he looked like someone who didn't belong among the silk-draped tables and golden chandeliers. Mariam froze when she saw him. It was President Ibrahim Traoré. She recognized him instantly, not from television glamour, but from real images. The way he visited remote villages in dusty shirts, the way he listened carefully to ordinary people. But no one else seemed to notice. The maître d', a stiff man named Alain, stormed toward the newcomer, fake smile stretched tight across his face. "Good evening, sir," Alain said coldly. "I'm afraid we are fully booked tonight. Perhaps you can try a cafe down the street?" Ibrahim, calm as always, simply nodded. "I understand. Perhaps I could just order something to take away?" Alain scoffed, not even hiding his contempt. "Sir, we are not a takeaway restaurant. We are a private dining experience for our distinguished clientele." Mariam felt her stomach twist. Around her, other waiters watched, some smirking, others pretending not to see. It was unbearable. Stepping forward before she could lose her nerve, Mariam said, her voice firm but respectful, "He's not causing any trouble. If he wishes to order something, we should serve him." Alain turned to her sharply, his eyes flashing with anger. "Mariam, stay out of this." But she didn't. She grabbed a menu, walked over to Ibrahim, and placed it gently in front of him. "Please, sir," she said softly, "choose anything you'd like." Ibrahim looked up at her, his eyes warm with quiet gratitude. "A simple meal if it's not too much trouble." The restaurant had fallen completely silent. Patrons were glancing over their wine glasses. A few whispered behind their napkins. Alain was fuming, his face turning crimson. "Enough!" he barked. "You're fired. Pack your things and leave immediately." Mariam stood frozen. The words rang in her ears. Fired? For this? She felt her throat tighten, but she refused to show weakness. Slowly, she untied her apron, folded it neatly, and placed it on the nearest table. With one final glance at Ibrahim Traoré, who simply nodded at her with a look that carried 1,000 unspoken words, she turned and walked out into the cold Paris night. She had no idea that everything in her life was about to change, and that by tomorrow the world would know exactly what kind of man they had tried to turn away, and what kind of woman had the courage to stand with him. Mariam trudged home through the narrow streets, each step heavier than the last. Her mind raced with questions. How would she pay rent? What would she tell her family? Was it foolish to have thrown everything away for a simple act of decency? The city lights blurred in her vision, but not from the rain. From the tears she refused to let fall. At her tiny apartment, she sank into a worn chair and stared blankly at the wall. Her phone buzzed against the table, but she ignored it. What could possibly make any of this better? Another buzz, and another. Finally, sighing heavily, she picked it up. Her heart jolted. Her friend Fatima had sent a frantic message. "Mariam, is it true? You helped President Ibrahim Traoré tonight?" Mariam blinked, stunned. "How do you know that?" she texted back. Within seconds, Fatima replied with a screenshot. There, all over social media, was a grainy photo. Ibrahim Traoré, sitting quietly at the corner table of the restaurant. Above it, a caption that made Mariam's blood run cold and hot all at once. Paris restaurant humiliates visiting African leader. Brave waitress defends him. Gets fired. The comments were exploding. Unbelievable. They treated the president of Burkina Faso like a street beggar. This woman should be honored, not fired. Respect to Mariam. Shame on that restaurant. Mariam's heart pounded. Before she could process it, her phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't a message, it was a call. The number was unknown, but something deep inside told her to answer. With shaking hands, she picked up. "Hello?" The voice on the other end was calm, steady, familiar. "Good evening, Mariam," Ibrahim Traoré said. She nearly dropped the phone. I, Mr. President, she stammered, feeling her cheeks flush with embarrassment, fear, awe. But he interrupted her gently. Please, he said, no titles. Tonight, you treated me like a man worthy of dignity. Not because of who I am, but because of what you believe is right. That matters more than any office I hold. Mariam blinked rapidly, fighting back tears. I only did what anyone should have done, she whispered. There was a small chuckle on the line. If only more thought like you. He paused, then added, Mariam, tomorrow morning, a car will be waiting for you. I would like you to meet me. There is something we must discuss. Before she could even form a question, he said simply, It's time people like you stopped getting punished for doing the right thing. It's time you had a seat at the table where real change is made. And then he hung up. Mariam sat there frozen, the dial tone humming in her ear, the weight of his words sinking in. She had stood up for a stranger. That stranger was a president, and tomorrow her entire life would take a turn she had never dared to imagine. Morning light spilled through the cracks of Mariam's curtains, painting golden streaks across the room. She barely slept. Her mind had been trapped between disbelief and hope, between fear and a stubborn flicker of excitement she couldn't extinguish. At exactly 8 a.m., a sleek black car pulled up outside her modest building. It was out of place among the cracked sidewalks and worn facades. Neighbors peeked out from windows, curious and suspicious. A man in a simple dark suit stepped out and scanned the building before glancing at his phone. Mariam Sawadogo, he called. She opened her door and stepped into the street, clutching a small bag she had packed. Not because she knew what was coming, but because something deep inside told her she would not return to this life the same. I'm Mariam, she said, voice steadier than she felt. The man smiled warmly and opened the car door for her without another word. The ride through the city was surreal. The towering skyline, the streets she had walked every day without being noticed. Today, it all looked different, brighter, sharper, like she was stepping out of a shadow she hadn't even realized she lived under. After nearly an hour, the car turned down a private road lined with ancient oak trees. At the end stood a grand yet understated building. Not a palace, not a monument, but a place built with purpose and dignity. Strong lines, wide open windows, a place that welcomed light. The car stopped. The driver opened her door again. Inside the lobby, security guards in plain clothes nodded respectfully. There was no gold, no red carpet, no unnecessary glamour. Just quiet professionalism. An older woman greeted her at the desk and motioned her to follow. Every step Mariam took echoed in the halls. Finally, the woman led her to a double door. He's waiting for you inside, she said, and left. Mariam took a deep breath, steadied her hands, and pushed open the door. Inside was a large sunlit room lined with bookshelves, maps, and a long wooden table. At the head of it sat Ibrahim Traoré, not in a suit or ceremonial robes, but in a simple white shirt and dark trousers. His sleeves were rolled up, and papers were spread in front of him. He looked up when she entered and smiled warmly. Mariam, he said, rising, thank you for coming. She dipped her head awkwardly, not sure if she should bow, curtsy, shake his hand. But he crossed the room and shook hers firmly, like an equal. Please sit, he said. She obeyed, her nerves coiled tight. He sat across from her, studying her for a moment, not with judgment, but with an almost searching kindness. You didn't know who I was, he said softly. She nodded. No, sir, no, Mr. Traoré, he chuckled lightly. And yet you stood up for me, risked your livelihood, without hesitation. Mariam swallowed, feeling the shame creep back in. I just thought it was wrong, she said, to treat someone badly because of appearances. Ibrahim leaned back in his chair, hands folded thoughtfully. That's rare, he said, especially in a world where people bow only to money or power. He let the words settle, then continued. Mariam, we live in a time when titles overshadow character. When the uniform, the car, the jewelry, the accent, these things blind people. You are not blinded. She didn't know what to say. She gripped her hands tightly under the table. Then he leaned forward, lowering his voice. I have a proposal for you. Her heart stuttered. I am building something, he said. Not a palace, not a monument, a program, a new network that will lift the invisible ones, the workers, the students, the forgotten, a foundation that teaches dignity, not dependence, empowerment, not charity. He paused, letting her absorb it. And I need people like you to lead it. Mariam's breath caught. Me? She whispered. Ibrahim smiled, a glint of something fierce and unbreakable in his eyes. You understand the weight of injustice because you have carried it. You didn't need to know I was a president to see my worth. You see with your heart first. That is the vision we need. Mariam blinked back tears. But I have no experience, no degree in politics. Good, Ibrahim interrupted gently. The world doesn't need more polished politicians. It needs brave souls. He slid a simple folder across the table toward her. Inside was a letter bearing his signature, offering her a leadership role in the new initiative, a real salary, training, a future. Mariam covered her mouth with trembling hands. Everything she thought she'd lost the night before, her job, her security, was nothing compared to what she was gaining now. Respect, purpose, a new beginning. She looked up at Ibrahim Traoré, a man she had once seen only as another quiet customer in a busy restaurant, and realized this was not an ending. It was the first day of the rest of her life. The next morning, the sun rose over the city like a slow exhale, golden light softening the edges of a world about to change. Mariam sat in the back seat of the same black car, her hands trembling slightly in her lap. The folder offering her a future was tucked carefully into her bag. She wasn't dressed in a uniform anymore. She wore simple, elegant clothes Ibrahim's team had provided. Nothing flashy, but everything dignified. She still felt like an imposter in them. But when she glanced at her reflection in the car window, she saw something new. Not fear, not shame. Hope. The car pulled into a courtyard, surrounded by journalists, photographers, flashing cameras. Mariam flinched instinctively. She wasn't used to being seen, let alone wanted. The driver leaned back and said calmly, "They're here for you, Miss Sawadogo." Her throat tightened. This was bigger than her now. She stepped out into the morning light, blinking against the flashes. Questions flew through the air like arrows. Are you the waitress who helped the president? How does it feel to be recruited by Ibrahim Traoré himself? What does this say about justice in our society? She didn't know how to answer. She only smiled shyly and moved toward the building, security parting the crowd. Inside, the walls were buzzing with energy. Staff members greeted her like an old friend. Some shook her hand. Some simply placed a hand over their hearts, a gesture of respect in Traoré's circle. And at the center of it all, Ibrahim himself waited. No bodyguards, no entourage, just him, a presence that made the ground feel steadier beneath her feet. Welcome home, he said simply. Mariam blinked rapidly, fighting tears. Thank you for seeing me, she whispered. He smiled. No, he corrected. Thank you for reminding me why we fight. That day was a blur of meetings, introductions, training sessions. Mariam listened, absorbed, and asked questions. She wasn't treated like a beginner. She was treated like a vital piece of the future. By noon, the first news articles started hitting the internet. Ibrahim Traoré appoints former waitress to key leadership role. Acts of kindness, how a simple stand changed a nation's conversation. Not status, but character, a new era under Traoré's vision. Mariam's phone wouldn't stop vibrating. Friends, strangers, journalists. Some messages were full of admiration, others jealousy. A few darker. That's when the backlash started. Certain voices on television, tied to the old elite, scoffed. This is populism. She's just a waitress. How can she run anything important? Standards are being destroyed. Social media lit up with debates, some praising the decision as a revolution in leadership, others mocking Mariam, digging into her past, looking for any reason to pull her down. By sunset, Mariam sat alone in one of the smaller conference rooms, the weight of it all finally hitting her. She stared at her phone, the cruel comments blurring into a sea of noise. Who was she to think she could stand among them? Why had Ibrahim believed in her? The door opened quietly. It was him. Ibrahim Traoré closed the door behind him and sat down across from her. He didn't say anything at first. He simply looked at her, really looked, until her defenses crumbled. They're right, she whispered, ashamed. I don't belong here. He leaned forward, his voice calm but unshakable. The ones shouting the loudest are the ones most afraid of you, he said. That they're afraid because you didn't climb the ladder the way they demanded. You didn't beg for permission to matter. Mariam's hands tightened in her lap. They measure worth by wealth, by bloodlines, by titles, Ibrahim continued. But I measure it by courage, by dignity, by how you treat the unseen when no one's watching. He paused, letting the words settle deep into her bones. You didn't just earn your place, Mariam, he said. The you revealed how hollow theirs is. Tears spilled down her cheeks, tears of anger, relief, gratitude. So let them shout, Ibrahim said with a small smile. Let them scream. Meanwhile, we will build something they can never tear down. Mariam wiped her face roughly, standing a little straighter. What do you need me to do? She asked, voice steady again. He stood with her. I need you to keep being exactly who you are. Outside, the crowd raged and the critics roared louder than ever. But inside that building, in the small conference room flooded by the last light of the day, a new force had been quietly born. One that no insult, no headline, no smear campaign could ever extinguish. Mariam Sawadogo, once invisible, was about to help change the world. And Ibrahim Traoré, the man who saw past appearances, past fear, past status, had made sure of it. The days that followed moved like storms. Mariam barely had time to breathe. Meetings, briefings, learning names and faces, building alliances she had never imagined she'd be part of. But nothing prepared her for what came next. 1 week after her appointment, an explosive news story broke. A chain of luxury hotels tied to powerful political families had been caught exploiting low-income workers, confiscating tips, even threatening staff who dared speak up. It was a scandal that reached the highest circles of wealth and privilege. And suddenly, it wasn't Ibrahim Traoré on the front line. It was Mariam. Her face was now linked to change, enemies she had never met before. Men and women who had sneered at Ibrahim's open-door leadership now saw her as a threat to be crushed. A whisper campaign began almost immediately. She's just a waitress. She doesn't understand diplomacy. Traoré has lost control. Anonymous emails flooded the office. Online trolls unleashed a storm of cruelty. There were threats too, ugly ones. One evening, as she sat at her desk, Mariam received a message. A grainy photo of her old apartment, captioned, "Go back to where you belong." For a moment, terror gripped her throat. She wasn't a fighter. She was just a girl who had served coffee and wiped tables. Who was she to stand against this? That night, Ibrahim asked to see her privately. He sat across from her once more, the same way he had that first day. They're afraid, he said simply, and fear makes people dangerous. It also makes them stupid. Mariam clenched her hands into fists. I don't want to let you down. Ibrahim smiled, not a politician's smile, not a leader's smile, but something deeper. Mariam, he said, you've already won. You just have to keep standing. He handed her a small envelope. Inside was a single piece of paper. On it, in Ibrahim's careful handwriting, were 5 words. Strength is born in silence. He didn't say anything else. He didn't need to. The next morning, Mariam walked into the press conference hall, her heart hammering in her chest. Journalists crowded the front row. Flashes exploded in her eyes. Cameras rolled live across West Africa and beyond. She took her seat at the front table, facing them all. When her name was called, she stood. For a moment, she hesitated. The years of being told to stay quiet, stay small, pulling at her like chains. Then, she remembered Ibrahim's words. She raised her head, and she spoke. I am Mariam Sawadogo, she said, voice clear. I am not ashamed of where I come from. I am proud of it, because it taught me the value of hard work, of dignity, of fighting for those who have no voice. The room fell silent. She continued, stronger with every word. We will not allow the powerful to steal from those who build this country with their hands and their hope. Not anymore. We are not going back to the old ways. Not while President Traoré leads, and not while we stand together. The silence cracked open, replaced by applause. Real applause. Not polite, not staged, raw and human. Journalists who had come expecting to mock her found themselves clapping. Viewers at home who had once doubted her now leaned closer to their screens. And those who had tried to crush her heard something even louder than her voice. They heard the future. Later that evening, Ibrahim found her standing alone on the balcony, staring out over the city lights. He didn't say anything at first. He just stood beside her, looking out. Finally, Mariam said softly, "I'm still scared." Ibrahim smiled faintly. "Good," he said. "It means you still have something worth protecting." She turned to him. "Thank you for seeing me," she whispered again. "No," he replied quietly. "Thank you for reminding me why we fight." The night air carried their words away, scattering them like seeds. And somewhere across the city, and the country beyond, thousands of small lights burned brighter. Lives touched by one woman's courage and one leader's belief that dignity was not for the few, but for all.